In the last episode of Pinpoint, I set the tone for an elucidation of the idea of Hindu Rashtra, divorced from both the puerile rhetoric of the left liberal intelligentsia and the confused apologia and embarrassing chauvinism of the so-called right wing. But let me quickly add that by claiming to reject the views of the right as well as the left here, I am not playing safe and being a scared centrist. As you will see, it just so happens that, like most great ideas of the Hindu civilization, the concept of Hindu Rashtra also transcends these alien binaries. In an earlier video, you might remember, I had ridiculed the idea of a world without borders and mentioned how liberals often borrow the Upanishadic idea of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, or the world is a family, and apply it in the wrong context. Today, I will also try to spell out the right context in which it ought to be applied. The idea of Hindu Rashtra was born in pre-independence India, when it was yet uncertain if and when India would gain her political freedom. There were, of course, many competing ideas as people were still debating what kind of a polity independent India should have. Now, much water has flown under the bridge, and not all those ideas are relevant anymore, because what was to happen has already happened. And thus, some of the ideas have completely lost their meaning. So I'm taking up the most compelling and futuristic vision of the Hindu nation as articulated by the 20th century sage and revolutionary Aurobindo Ghosh. A few months ago, when the anti-CAA protests were going on in various parts of India, we heard of a statement of concern by the American billionaire and philanthropist George Soros, who was seemingly outraged by how Narendra Modi was creating a so-called Hindu nationalist state in India. He publicly pledged $1 billion for a new project to battle the erosion of civil society. He also said that the survival of open societies was endangered all over the world at this transformational moment in history. There was the usual cheering of anything spoken by a white man from the usual quarters, and also a lot of chest thumping from the other side, who were understandably angry that a foreigner was poking his nose in India's internal affairs. Soros is an admirable man. He has made a huge amount of money as a financial investor, and he puts his money where his mouth is. That is, he is not just another rich guy, but a philanthropist who spends his money in the service of his ideas. He is a philosopher in his own right and was a student of the great 20th century philosopher of science, Karl Popper, from whom he sort of inherited this passion for open society. So what do they really mean by open society? It is just a global alliance of free people who can peacefully coexist and flourish all over the planet. The term open society was first introduced by Henry Bergson in 1932 in his writings, in which he postulated that there were two sources of ethics: tribal, say like how the Tablighi Jamaat thinks and acts, and universal, reflected by empathy and goodwill in members of a society. Tribal ethics lead to a closed society, and universal ethics lead to an open society. The idea of open society was further enriched by Karl Popper himself. He said that ideologies that claim to be in possession of the ultimate truth pose the biggest threat to open societies, which means that any ideology that does not recognize that reality is much more complex than our feeble brains can handle leads to oppression, because their claims can only be imposed by some form of violence, physical, intellectual, political, etc. Thus, open societies can be only built on the premise that our understanding of the world will always be highly imperfect, and that the only certainty is in the fact that our actions will always have unintended consequences. All that is fine, but how would an open society look like? Are we already living in one? Soros contends that global capitalism has pushed us a step closer to a global open society, as it has weakened the stranglehold of nation states on people, which is great because states tend to abuse their powers. At the same time, he correctly recognizes that the transnational corporations are replacing state sovereignty with a blind greed for profit. And this has caused huge problems like inequitable wealth distribution, ecological disaster, pollution, and so on. So the loss of state power must be compensated by a strengthening of international institutions. But what gets in the way is market fundamentalism, which in simple words is the free market dogma that you just cannot allow any interference in market forces of demand and supply. Basically, Soros has a deep mistrust of governments, and by the way, I'm totally sympathetic to that view. And so he believes that democracy within nations must be strengthened by international institutions. And we must not leave the job in the hands of the governments, who will obviously never do it because the private corporations will not let them do that. Soros also recognizes the role played by governments in creating internal stability within their territories, which is a necessary condition for open society to flourish. He urges the United States of America to leave behind the pettiness of its foreign policy and play a lead role in steering the world towards a new global open society. Going back to the news from January, this is why Soros thinks that a rise of Hindu nationalism is bad for India and the world. But what does Soros know about Hindu nationalism? He sees it as another form of imperialist toxic nationalism that captured the European imagination in the colonial era and later culminated in the world wars and the genocide of the Jews. Hindu nationalism, by virtue of being born in colonized India, quite obviously was opposed to the imperialist nationalism of Europe because Hindus were victims of the same mindset. But never mind, let us turn to Sri Aurobindo now. We find that for Aurobindo, the political independence of India was not the final goal, but a necessary step on the way of establishing the ideal of human unity. Yes, the twist in the plot is that Sri Aurobindo was talking about human unity, which is another name for global open society. And this was much before the term open society was even coined. Before that, Swami Vivekananda's lecture at the Parliament of World Religions in 1893 also spoke of the grand Vedantic vision of human unity. In fact, there is very little to differentiate between the end goal of Soros and Aurobindo, and even the path to reach there. Both speak against dogmatic ideologies, both advocate for a strengthening of international institutions, and there is so much overlap in their thoughts that Soros's criticism of the United Nations reads as if it was plagiarized from Sri Aurobindo's writings on the League of Nations. And this was from decades ago. So for Aurobindo, the global open society is an inevitability if we are to survive as a species. Where he differs with Soros is in the path to getting there. While Aurobindo advocates for changes in the world order and the growth of international institutions just like Soros, he considers them only the outwardly conditions that are by themselves incapable of achieving the goal. For him, the real deal is in a paradigm shift in consciousness of a large mass of human beings, without which human unity is a pathetic pipe dream. To achieve this colossal task of fast-forwarding biological evolution, Sri Aurobindo sees India as the only country capable of delivering the goods. Not because he has racist ideas, but simply because no other nation has inherited the kind of spiritual legacy that India has. So back to the Upanishadic statement of Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam that liberals and politicians carelessly throw around. It only makes sense in an elevated state of being when human beings are not enslaved by their vital passions or dazzled by their own mental activity. Remember, Karl Popper spoke about the human condition that is characterized by an imperfect understanding of the world. According to Hindu thought, that imperfection is a property of the mind, and it is only by transcending the mind that you can arrive at a state of poise and equanimity that makes you non-violent. That is real ahimsa. and the world can only be a family for people who abide in that state, not for imposters who use the slogan to win elections or impress people. In the next part of the series, we will explore another dimension of what a Hindu Rashtra would really look like, not based on the junk written in newspaper columns, but through a sound understanding of the principles of Dharma. For now, I will leave you with a quote on nationalism from Sri Aurobindo himself, from his famous Uttarapara speech delivered as early as 1909. I said last year that this movement is not a political movement, and that nationalism is not politics but a religion, a creed, a faith. I say it again, but I put it in another way today. I say no longer that nationalism is a creed, a religion, a faith. I say that it is the Sanatan Dharma, which for us is nationalism. The Sanatan Dharma, that is nationalism. This is the message that I have to speak to you. End quote.